You light a candle sometimes and you don't really know why. Maybe it's for dinner or ambience, or because the power went out and you needed something while you waited for the electrician to text back. You blow it out when you're done. The wax cools, the wick blackens. Tomorrow you might do it again, or you might not. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a thing you did. But somewhere in the back of your mind, lighting that candle feels like it should mean something, like there's a gesture buried in the act that you've inherited but never learned to translate. You see other people light candles too, at vigils, on birthdays, in churches or temples, or at memorials for strangers. Sometimes thousands of people light candles together, and no one explains why, and no one asks. The flame becomes the answer. The flicker becomes the prayer. You feel something when you see it, even if you're not religious, even if you don't believe in anything the candle was supposed to invoke. You feel something and you don't question it. That's the strange thing about rituals, isn't it? They outlast their explanations. You participate in them, even when the reason has worn away, even when you've forgotten what they were supposed to do, or who they were supposed to reach. You still feel the pull. You still light the candle. You still bow your head for a moment of silence. You still sing happy birthday like it's a spell. You still throw rice or break glass or pour one out for the dead. And it feels right, even when it feels meaningless, especially when it feels meaningless. You live in a world now where almost nothing you do is symbolic. Everything is functional, or it's entertainment, or it's optimized for efficiency. You don't perform gestures for invisible audiences. You don't mark time with collective rhythms that aren't tied to productivity. You don't live inside a calendar of feast days and fasts, of planting songs and harvest prayers, of moments when everyone stopped and turned toward the same thing at the same time. You live in a world where you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. And it should feel like freedom, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it just feels like static. Because when you light a candle for no reason, you're brushing up against something you've lost. Not the candle itself, you still have those. Not the fire, you can make fire anytime you want. What you've lost is the feeling that the candle connected you to something, that it placed you inside a larger order, that it said, you are here, in this moment, doing what others have done and what others will do. And that makes you part of something that was bigger than your own small life. You didn't have to understand it. You didn't have to believe it. You just had to do it. And in doing it, you knew where you stood. That's what's missing now. Not the rituals themselves. You can still find those if you want them. What's missing is the certainty that they matter. The sense that when you light the candle or say the words or bow your head, you're not performing for yourself. You're answering something, participating in something. You're slipping into a groove worn smooth by a million other hands, and that groove holds you. Modernity gave you choices. It gave you autonomy. It gave you the freedom to decide what you believe, what you value, what you spend your time on. And those are good things. But it also gave you the weight of those choices. It made you responsible for creating your own meaning, your own place, your own sense of order in a universe that doesn't care. And that weight is heavier than you thought it would be. You feel it most when you're alone, when you're scrolling at night and the algorithm keeps feeding you content and none of it sticks. When you're in a crowd of strangers and everyone's looking at their phones and no one's looking at each other. When you achieve something you worked hard for and the dopamine spike lasts about 6 hours, and then you're back to wondering what's next. When you realize you can't remember the last time you felt like you were part of something that didn't require you to perform, or optimize, or explain yourself. You start to wonder if people used to feel this way, if they felt this untethered, this optional. Logically, that they didn't have it easier. They faced cold and hunger and disease and violence and early death. They were trapped by circumstances you can't imagine enduring. But still, you wonder. Did they feel this kind of loneliness? This kind of restlessness? Did they lie awake at night wondering what the point was? Or did the point come pre-installed? And that's when the candle comes back into your mind. Not because it solves anything, but because it reminds you that there was a time when small gestures held large meanings, when lighting a flame wasn't just light. It was hope, or memory, or defiance, or grief, when everyone around you understood what it meant without needing to say it. When the act itself was enough. You miss that, not because you want to go back, not because you think their lives were better, but because they had something you don't. A sense that their actions, even the small ones, connected them to a moral order they didn't have to invent. They could suffer, they could doubt, they could rage against the cruelty of existence, but they couldn't fall out of the world. The world had a place for them, carved out by centuries of shared practice. And even when the meaning faded, even when belief wavered, the rituals held. You light candles now, and it feels like a ghost of that, a memory of a memory. You don't know what you're reaching for, but you reach anyway. And sometimes, just for a second, it almost feels like home. That feeling, the one you get when you light a candle for no reason, and or stand in silence with strangers, or hum a hymn you don't believe in. It's not nostalgia for a specific past. It's nostalgia for a structure, for a way of being in the world that didn't require you to justify your existence every single day. For a time when you could just do the thing everyone did, and in doing it, know that you belonged. You can't go back to that. You wouldn't want to, even if you could. But you can remember it. You can honor what it gave people. You can sit with the ache of its absence and let it teach you something about what you've gained and what you've lost. And maybe, if you're quiet enough, you can find a way to carry a little of that light forward. Not by pretending the old reasons still work, but by understanding why people needed them in the first place. Because the candle was never really about the candle. It was about knowing, without having to think about it, that you were part of something, that you had a place, that the things you did, even the small things, mattered to someone, somewhere, in some way that transcended your individual life. And that's what you're looking for when you strike the match in the dark. Think about the first time you stood in a cathedral, or a temple, or some ancient place of worship you didn't grow up with. Maybe you were a tourist. Maybe you were dragged there by someone who cared more than you did. Maybe you wandered in out of the rain. You weren't a believer. The symbols on the walls didn't speak to you in any literal sense. The prayers being murmured in the corners weren't yours. The incense, the icons, the rituals unfolding around you, they belonged to someone else's story. And yet, something in you went still. Something softened. Maybe it was just the architecture, the way light fell through stained glass, the acoustics of stone. Maybe it was just the relief of quiet in a noisy world. But maybe it was something else. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of centuries of people coming to that same spot, lighting the same candles, saying the same words, asking the same questions. Maybe you felt, without knowing why, that you were standing in a place that held something. Not God, necessarily, not anything you could name, but a kind of residue, a thickness in the air, the presence of all that longing and all that faith and all that grief compressed into one space, layered over and over until the walls themselves seemed to hum with it. You didn't convert, you didn't suddenly start believing, but you felt something. And when you left, you felt a little lighter, or a little heavier, or a little more thoughtful than when you went in. You felt touched by something you didn't understand. That's the thing about ritual spaces. They don't require your belief to work on you. They just require your presence. They offer you a role to play, even if you don't know your lines. Stand here, bow your head, light this candle, sit in this silence. You don't have to mean it. You don't have to understand it. The gesture itself is enough. For most of human history, people lived inside these gestures. Their lives were shaped by them, structured by them, made meaningful by them. They didn't choose most of them. They inherited them, the way they inherited language or kinship or the songs their mothers sang. The rituals came first. Tsara and the individual life unfolded within them, like a river following the shape of the land. You got up when the bell rang. You fasted when the calendar said to fast. You prayed at certain times, in certain ways, facing certain directions. You lit candles on certain nights. You poured libations for the dead. You marked the solstice, the equinox, the new moon, the harvest. You participated in dramas you didn't write, spoke words you didn't invent, made gestures older than your language. And in doing so, you became part of something. You joined the long line of people who had done this before you and the longer line of those who would do it after. You took your place in the pattern. You affirmed, just by showing up, that the pattern mattered, that it was worth maintaining, that it held something precious, even if you couldn't articulate what. Most of those rituals weren't about joy. They weren't about personal fulfillment or self-expression or finding your authentic self. They were about survival, about continuity, about teaching each generation how to orient themselves in a world that was vast and indifferent and often cruel. The rituals said, this is how you greet the dawn. This is how you honor the dead. This is how you mark the passage of time. This is how you remember who you are. They gave you a script when the stakes were too high to improvise. They gave you something to do with your hands when your heart was too broken to know what to do. They gave you a way to be together when words failed. They took the enormous, crushing weight of existence and broke it into manageable gestures. Light the candle, say the prayer, break the bread, or pour the wine. These small acts became handles you could grip when everything else was slipping away. You didn't have to feel anything specific when you performed them. You didn't have to be in the right mood. You didn't have to achieve some transcendent state. You just had to do them. And in doing them, you participated in the world's ongoing conversation with itself about what it meant to be human. Because that's what ritual is, really. It's the conversation. It's the accumulated wisdom of everyone who came before you, trying to tell you something important. Trying to say, we were here. We suffered too. We didn't understand either. But we found that doing this helped. It didn't fix anything. It didn't make the pain go away. But it gave us a shape to hold, a form to pour our formless grief and hope into. And it made us feel less alone. When you light a candle at a memorial, you're not really trying to illuminate anything. You're not really talking to the dead. You're joining everyone else who ever stood in the dark and needed to make a small light and call it hope. You're doing what people have always done when they didn't know what else to do. You're saying, with your body, with your hands, I was here. This mattered. I won't let the darkness have the last word. And everyone around you understands, even if no one says anything. Because they've inherited the same script. They know what the candle means, even if they couldn't explain it. They know that some gestures are older than reasons, and that's okay. The gesture carries its own weight. You've lost most of that now. Not entirely. You still have birthdays and weddings and funerals. You still have moments when everyone knows what to do without being told. But the connective tissue is thinner. The rituals that used to structure every day, every week, every season, they've faded. You've traded them for flexibility, for choice, for the freedom to construct your own meaning. And that's not nothing. That freedom is real. It's valuable. It lets you escape the cages that ritual can become when it hardens into dogma, when it's used to control instead of connect, when it serves power instead of people. You're right to defend that freedom. You're right to resist anyone who wants to force you back into scripts you didn't choose. But freedom has a cost, and the cost is this. You have to build your own cathedral now. You have to create your own sense of order, your own rhythms, your own moments of meaning. And you're doing it alone, or nearly alone, in a culture that doesn't really support that kind of work. In a culture that tells you meaning comes from achievement, from consumption, from curating the perfect life, and sharing it with an audience that's only half paying attention. So you end up feeling unmoored. You end up lighting candles and not knowing why. You end up standing in other people's cathedrals and feeling a strange, inarticulate grief for something you never had. What you're grieving isn't the past. It's the certainty the past provided. The sense that someone, somewhere, had figured out how to be human, and all you had to do was follow the path they'd worn smooth. You didn't have to invent your own way. You didn't have to justify your existence. You just had to show up and do what everyone else was doing, and that was enough. It wasn't always good. It wasn't always kind. It often trapped people in roles they didn't choose, in lives they didn't want. It could be cruel and rigid and suffocating. But it was there. It held you. And when it holds you, even badly, you at least know where you are. Now you're free, and freedom feels like falling. So you reach for the candle. You light it without thinking. You watch the flame and feel something you can't name. And for just a moment, you're connected to everyone who ever did the same thing, for all the reasons no one remembers anymore. The light doesn't solve anything, but it reminds you that you're not the first person to stand in the dark and wonder what to do. And somehow, that's enough to keep you standing. Let's go back for a moment. Not to a specific time, because there isn't one, but to a kind of time. A way of living that existed for most of human history, in most places, in forms that varied wildly but shared certain deep structures. Imagine you wake up in a world where almost nothing you do is new. You sleep in a house your grandfather built, or in a structure that's been rebuilt in the same spot for generations. You wake when the sun rises, because that's when everyone wakes. You eat what the season provides because there's nothing else. You work the same land your parents worked, using tools that look like the tools their parents used. Your life is hard, unimaginably hard by modern standards. You're cold in winter and hot in summer, and there's no thermostat to adjust. You're hungry sometimes, actually hungry, the kind that gnaws at you for days. You've watched people you love die from things that would be trivial to treat now. Infections, childbirth, a bad fall. You've lost children. Everyone's lost children. Grief is as common as bread. But you're not alone in it. That's the crucial thing. Your suffering isn't private. It's shared, embedded in a community that knows what you're going through, because they're going through it too, or they went through it, or they will. Your pain has a place in the story everyone tells. It's not an aberration. It's not a failure. It's just life. And life is hard. And everyone knows that. And woven through that hardship, supporting it, structuring it, making it bearable, are the rituals. You wake, and before you do anything else, you might say a prayer. Not because you're particularly devout, necessarily, but because that's what you do. And it's as automatic as breathing. You ask for protection, or you give thanks for waking up at all, or you recite words so old no one remembers who first spoke them. The words aren't magic. They don't change anything material, but they orient you. They remind you that you're part of something larger than your own small life. You eat breakfast, if there's anything to eat, and you might bless the food. Again, not because you expect anything to happen, but because the blessing marks the transition from scarcity to sustenance, from work to rest, from individual to communal. Even if you're eating alone, the blessing connects you to everyone else who's saying the same words over their own meager meals. You go out to work, and the work is backbreaking and repetitive and endless. But it has a rhythm. The seasons tell you what to do and when to do it. You plant when everyone plants. You harvest when everyone harvests. There are songs for the planting and songs for the harvest, and everyone knows them, and singing them makes the work slightly less unbearable. The songs aren't entertainment. They're coordination. They're memory. They're a way of teaching the young what the old already know. They're a way of turning labor into something shared, something that belongs to everyone. When someone dies, and someone's always dying, the community gathers. There's a script for this. You wash the body, you dress it in certain clothes, you say certain prayers, you bury it in a certain way, facing a certain direction. You sit with the family, you bring food, you tell stories about the dead, you weep together, or you sit in silence together. And both are acceptable because the ritual makes space for whatever needs to be expressed. You don't do this because you want to. You do it because it's what you do. Because it's what everyone's always done. Because when your own grief comes, and it will, the community will do the same for you. The ritual ensures that no one has to face the worst moments alone, that no one has to invent a response to the unbearable. And then there are the festivals, the moments when work stops and the whole community gathers to mark something, a solstice, a harvest, a saint's day, a remembrance. These aren't vacations. They're not about relaxation or personal enjoyment. They're about renewal, about stepping out of ordinary time into sacred time, into a space where the usual rules don't apply, where abundance is shared even in the midst of scarcity, where roles can be reversed and tensions can be released, and everyone can remember for a moment that life is more than just survival. You feast when there's barely enough to eat because the feast says, we are still human. We are still capable of joy. We refuse to let the hardness of life grind us down to nothing. You dance, you sing, you tell stories, you light fires and let them burn all night. You drink too much, you laugh too loud, you do things you'll regret tomorrow. And tomorrow everyone will return to work and no one will speak of it. But everyone will carry the memory of that release, that reminder that life contains multitudes. And underneath all of it, threading through every day and every season, are the small rituals, the gestures you make without thinking, the way you greet a neighbor, the way you enter a home, the way you handle bread or fire or water, the way you mark a threshold or a birth or the first fruit of the season. These aren't laws exactly. They're more like manners, but deeper. They're the shape of respect, of gratitude, of recognition that you live in a world you didn't make and don't control. A world that gives and takes with no regard for your preferences. The rituals teach you humility. They teach you your place. Not in a degrading way, but in a locating way. They say, you are small, but you are part of something vast. Your life is brief, but it's connected to all the lives that came before and all the lives that will come after. You matter, not because you're special, but because you're here, doing what people do, carrying forward what needs to be carried. And here's the thing, you don't have to believe any of it for it to work. You can doubt the gods, you can question the stories, you can think the prayers are superstition and the rituals are just habit. But you still do them, because everyone else is doing them. Because not doing them would set you apart, would mark you as strange, would cut you off from the community that's your only protection against a hostile world. So you participate. You say the words, you make the gestures, you light the candles. And over time, something happens. The repetition wears a groove in you. The rhythm gets inside you. You start to feel the shape of the year not as an abstract calendar, but as a lived experience. The hunger of late winter, the hope of planting, the anxiety of waiting, the relief of harvest, the gratitude of plenty, the preparation for scarcity again. You feel yourself moving through a pattern that's larger than you, older than you, and that pattern holds you even when you don't believe in it. You start to understand that the rituals aren't really about belief. They're about practice, about doing the things so many times that it becomes part of who you are, so that when the crisis comes, and it always comes, you don't have to think. You just do what you've always done. You light the candle. You say the prayer. You gather the community. And that automatic response, that muscle memory of meaning, carries you through. This is what you've lost. Not the specific rituals. Those were never yours anyway. But the structure they provided, the sense that your life was embedded in something, that your actions connected to something, that you had a role to play in a drama that was bigger and older and more important than your individual preferences. You've gained so much by losing it. You've gained freedom, autonomy, the ability to choose your own path. You've escaped the suffocating weight of tradition, the cruelty of enforced conformity, the violence that always lurks at the edges of any system that demands obedience. But you've also lost the container, the shape that held you, the rhythm that oriented you. And now you're free-floating in a world of infinite choices, trying to construct your own meaning from scratch, wondering why it feels so exhausting. Because it is exhausting. Building your own cathedral is exhausting. Inventing your own rituals is exhausting. Trying to feel connected when all the old connective tissue has dissolved, that's exhausting too. And so sometimes you light a candle for no reason, and you feel a strange pang of loss for a life you never lived, in a world you'd never want to return to. What you're missing isn't the past. It's the gift the past gave to people who lived in it. The gift of not having to question everything, of not having to justify your existence, of knowing your place in an order that transcended your individual life. You can't have that gift anymore. The world has changed too much. You've changed too much, but you can honor it. You can understand what it provided. You can recognize that the ache you feel isn't weakness or nostalgia. It's your soul trying to tell you something about what humans need. We need rhythm. We need repetition. We need gestures that connect us to something larger. We need moments when we stop trying to optimize and achieve and just exist in a space that's been carved out for existing. We need sometimes to light candles for reasons we don't question. Because the questioning, the constant questioning, is part of what's wearing us down. There's a particular kind of loneliness that's hard to name. It's not the loneliness of being physically alone. You might be surrounded by people and still feel it. It's not the loneliness of being misunderstood, though that's part of it. It's deeper than that. It's the loneliness of feeling like your life doesn't connect to anything. Like you're just floating through days that don't add up to anything, doing things that don't mean anything, surrounded by other people who are also floating, also searching, also trying to figure out what the point is. You feel it most acutely in moments that should be meaningful, but aren't. When you accomplish something you've worked hard for, and the satisfaction lasts about 5 minutes before you're already thinking about the next thing. When you attend a wedding or a funeral, and go through the motions, and feel nothing, or feel something but can't name it, can't share it, can't connect it to anything beyond the moment. When you have a conversation that should be deep, but stays shallow, because neither of you knows how to get beneath the surface, how to say what you actually mean, how to break through the performance of having a life into the reality of living one. You scroll through social media and see everyone else's curated moments of meaning and wonder if they're faking it too, or if you're the only one who can't figure out how to make life feel real. You read articles about purpose and passion and finding your why, and they all seem to assume that meaning is something you create, something you choose, something you build through intentional action. And maybe that's true. Maybe meaning is a choice, but it's a heavy choice. It's a choice you have to make every single day, in every single moment, with no guarantee that it'll stick, no promise that it'll hold. And you're tired. You're so tired of choosing. You're tired of having to construct your own sense of purpose from scratch. You're tired of the pressure to be authentic, to be intentional, to optimize every aspect of your life. You're tired of feeling like if you're not passionate about your work and deeply connected to your community and constantly growing as a person, you're failing at being human. Sometimes you just want to be told what to do, not in an authoritarian way, not in a way that strips your agency, but in a way that gives you a break from the exhausting work of self-creation. You want someone to say, on this day, you do this thing, and you do it, and in doing it, you're connected to everyone else who's doing it. And that's enough. You don't have to feel anything specific. You don't have to perform your emotions. You just have to show up and participate and trust that the gesture itself carries meaning, even if you can't access it right now. That's what ritual used to provide, a break from the self. For a moment when you could stop trying to be unique and just be part of the pattern. When you could stop curating your identity and just inhabit a role that was bigger and older than you. In a ritual, you're not performing as yourself. You're performing as a human. You're doing what humans do when they face birth or death or transition or celebration. You're speaking words that have been spoken for centuries. You're making gestures that carry the weight of everyone who made them before you. And for the duration of the ritual, you get to rest in that. You get to let the ritual hold you instead of having to hold yourself. Modern life doesn't give you many opportunities for that. Everything's about self-expression, individual choice, personal brand. Even when you do something communal, you're expected to have your own take on it, your own angle, your own way of making it yours. The idea of just doing what everyone else does, without modification or personalization, feels almost transgressive. But sometimes that's exactly what you need. Sometimes you need to surrender to something larger, to stop trying to be special and just be present. To let the collective wisdom of the past carry you for a moment so you don't have to carry yourself. When you light a candle at a vigil, that's what you're doing. You're not lighting it because you have a unique relationship with grief or a special insight into loss. You're lighting it because that's what people do. Because the gesture says, what words can't. Because joining the sea of small flames is a way of saying, I'm here, I care, I don't know what else to do, but I'm doing this. And it works. Not because the candle has power, but because the collective act of lighting candles has power. Because when you see 1,000 people doing the same simple thing in silence, you feel something shift. You feel the weight of shared humanity. You feel less alone in your confusion and grief. You feel held by something larger than yourself, even if that something is just the accumulated gesture of everyone else who showed up and didn't know what else to do either. This is the paradox at the heart of ritual. It works best when you stop trying to make it work. When you stop analyzing it, stop trying to figure out what it means, stop asking whether you're doing it right or feeling the right things. When you just do it and let the doing be enough. Modern culture has trained you to be suspicious of that kind of surrender. It tells you that meaning has to be earned, if that significance has to be justified, that every action should have a clear purpose you can articulate. It's made you allergic to anything that smells like empty ritual, like going through the motions, like doing something just because that's what people do. And that's not entirely wrong. Empty ritual can be deadening. Doing things just because that's how they've always been done can lead to stagnation, cruelty, injustice. The modern suspicion of unexamined tradition has freed countless people from oppressive systems. But in throwing out the oppressive rituals, you've also thrown out the connective ones. The ones that weren't about control, but about care. The ones that said, when you don't know what to do this. When you're overwhelmed, follow this pattern. When you're lost, let this rhythm guide you home. Yes, you're trying to live without those guides now. You're trying to navigate entirely by your own internal compass, in a landscape that offers no landmarks. And it's not working. You can feel it's not working. The anxiety, the depression, the sense of meaninglessness that pervades modern life. These aren't just individual failures. They're symptoms of a structure that's been lost. You don't need to go back to the old structures. They were built for different times, different problems, different worlds. But you need something. You need patterns that connect you to other people. You need rhythms that orient you in time. You need gestures that say, this matters, even when you can't explain why. You need, sometimes, to stop choosing and just follow, to stop performing and just participate, to stop trying to make your life mean something and just live inside a meaning that's already there, waiting for you to step into it. That's what you feel when you light the candle. That's the ache, the pull, the strange sense of coming home to a place you've never been. You're not really missing the past. You're missing the feeling of being held, of knowing your place, of belonging to something that doesn't require you to justify your existence every moment of every day. And the candle, in its small way, offers that. For just a moment, you're not alone. You're not adrift. You're part of the long line of people who've stood in the dark and made light and called it hope. The flame doesn't fix anything, but it reminds you that you don't have to fix everything yourself. Sometimes the gesture is enough. Let's sit with that idea for a while. The gesture being enough? Because it runs counter to everything you've been taught about how meaning works. You've been taught that meaning comes from understanding, that you need to know why you're doing something for it to matter. That intention is what gives action significance. That if you're just going through the motions, you're being inauthentic, you're phoning it in, you're not really present. And in many contexts, that's true. You want your doctor to understand why they're prescribing you medication, not just follow a script. You want your relationships to be built on genuine connection, not performative gestures. You want your work to have purpose, not just be a series of empty tasks. But there's another kind of action, another kind of meaning that works differently. It's the meaning that comes not from understanding, but from participation, from showing up, from doing the thing even when you don't know why, trusting that the doing itself carries something valuable. Think about saying, "Bless you," when someone sneezes. You don't think about it. You don't believe you're actually blessing them or protecting them from demons or whatever the original reason was. You just say it automatically, because that's what people do. And the person who sneezed says, "Thank you," also automatically, and neither of you means anything specific by it, but something's happening in that exchange. Something small but real. You're acknowledging the other person's presence. You're performing a tiny act of care, of attention, of social cohesion. You're maintaining a thread of connection that's so fine you barely notice it. But it's there, and it matters. If you stopped to analyze it, if you asked yourself, "Why am I saying this? What does it mean? Am I being authentic?" the whole thing would fall apart. The power of the gesture is in its automaticity, its unreflective nature, its status as a shared script everyone knows. That's how most ritual works. It's not about conscious intention. It's about embedded practice, about doing things so many times that they become part of your body, your muscle memory, your automatic response to certain situations. And when they're automatic, they free you from having to think, having to decide, having to perform, being someone who knows what to do. You just do what people do. And in doing it, you become part of the pattern. There's a relief in that. A deep, profound relief that's hard to access in a culture that values consciousness and intentionality above all else. Because consciousness is exhausting. Being intentional all the time is exhausting. Having to know why you're doing everything, having to justify every action, having to perform authenticity in every moment, it's too much. It's more than a human nervous system can sustain. You need moments when you can stop performing, when you can stop trying to be yourself and just be a human doing human things, when you can let the ancient pattern take over and carry you for a while. That's what your ancestors had, not because they were wiser or better or more spiritual, but because they lived in a world where most of what they did was patterned, scripted, embedded in collective practice. They didn't have to invent their responses to life's major events. The responses were already there, worn smooth by centuries of use. When someone died, you knew what to do. When a child was born, you knew what to do. When the seasons changed, when disaster struck, when fortune smiled, you knew what to do. Not because you'd figured it out yourself, but because the community had figured it out long ago and encoded the answer in ritual. And yes, sometimes the rituals were wrong. Sometimes they were cruel. Sometimes they needed to be questioned, challenged, changed. But even when they were imperfect, they provided something crucial. a shared language for navigating the unbearable. Because life is unbearable sometimes. It just is. People you love die. Things you've worked for fall apart. Suffering arrives without warning and without reason. Well, and in those moments, you need something to hold on to. You need something to do with your hands, your body, your voice. You need a way to move through the pain that doesn't require you to understand it or overcome it or transform it into a learning experience. You just need to be able to grieve, to rage, to sit in the unbearable and have the unbearable be okay. Ritual makes space for that. It says, you don't have to be strong right now. You don't have to find the silver lining. You don't have to grow from this. You just have to do this thing. Light this candle, say these words, sit in this silence, and let the gesture carry what you can't. Modern life has very few containers for that kind of unproductive grief. Everything's supposed to be a journey, a process, a path to healing. You're supposed to work through your emotions, find closure, and come out the other side stronger and wiser. And sometimes that happens, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you just hurt, and you keep hurting, and there's nothing to learn from it, nothing to gain. The old rituals knew that. They made space for endless grief, for anger that had no resolution, for questions that had no answers. They didn't try to fix you. They just held you while you fell apart. You light candles for the dead, not because it brings them back, not because it makes you feel better, but because it's something to do when there's nothing to be done. It's a gesture that says, I remember, I hurt, this matters. And those statements don't need to go anywhere. They don't need to transform into acceptance or peace or wisdom. They can just exist, held by the light of a small flame that burns and eventually goes out. That's the other thing ritual gives you. Permission to let things end. Modern culture wants everything to be sustainable, permanent, scalable. You're supposed to build things that last, create legacies, make your mark. Even your grief is supposed to transform into something productive. A charity in their name, a lesson learned, a way you've grown. But the candle doesn't last. It burns and it goes out. And that's okay. That's part of the ritual. The impermanence is the point. You light it knowing it will die. You watch it burn, knowing it will consume itself. And in that watching, you practice letting go. You practice accepting that nothing lasts, that all light is temporary, that the darkness always returns. But you also practice the other thing, that you can always light another candle, that the darkness is never final. That even when the flame goes out, you can strike another match, you can begin again. You can make light even when making light seems pointless. This is the wisdom encoded in the gesture. Not a wisdom you think about, but a wisdom you embody. Your hands know it. Your body knows it. Light the candle, watch it burn. Let it die. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Until the repetition teaches you something about the rhythm of loss and renewal that no amount of thinking could convey. Your ancestors did this thousands of times in their lives. They lit fires, watched them burn, let them die. They planted seeds, watched them grow, harvested them, ate them, planted again. They were born, they lived, they died, and their children repeated the pattern. They didn't have to understand the cycle to live inside it. They just did the next thing, and the next, and the next, and the doing itself was a form of knowing. You've lost that embodied knowing. You live in your head now, trying to think your way through everything, trying to understand before you act. And there's value in that. But there's also a cost. The cost is that you've forgotten how to just do things, how to let your body lead, how to trust the gesture even when your mind is full of doubt. When you light a candle and don't know why, you're brushing up against that older way of being. Your body remembers what your mind has forgotten. The gesture pulls you down, out of your head, into the simple physical reality of flame and wax and breath. And for a moment, you're not trying to figure anything out. You're just there, present, watching the light flicker. Being a human doing a human thing. That's enough. That's always been enough. And the candle doesn't care if you understand it. It just burns. And you don't have to understand either. You can just let it burn and let yourself be changed by the burning in ways you'll never fully articulate. That's the gift ritual offers. Not answers, but a way of being with the questions. Not solutions, but a shape to hold while you live inside the uncertainty. You don't have to go back to the past to receive that gift. You don't have to adopt beliefs you don't hold or join communities you don't belong to. You just have to be willing, sometimes, to do things for no reason. To light the candle without asking why. To say the words without needing to mean them. To participate in the gesture and let the gesture teach you what it knows. Because the gesture knows things your conscious mind can't access. It knows about continuity and connection. It knows about being part of a pattern larger than yourself. It knows about making meaning through action rather than thought. And you need that knowing right now. You need it because you're drowning in thought, in choice, in the endless work of constructing meaning from scratch. Sometimes you need to stop constructing and start receiving. To stop choosing and start following. To stop being special and start being ordinary. The candle is how you do that. The small, stupid, inexplicable gesture of lighting a flame in the dark. It doesn't solve your loneliness. It doesn't answer your questions. It doesn't give you the structure you're missing. But it reminds you that structure existed. That humans have always needed these small gestures, these quiet rituals, these moments of participating in something larger. And that reminder, that tiny thread of connection to everyone who came before, is sometimes enough to help you keep going. Not because it changes anything, but because it says, you're not alone in feeling lost. You're not the first person to stand in the dark and not know what to do. And the people who stood here before you, they lit candles. They made small lights. They did what they could with what they had. And somehow, that was enough to get them through. Maybe it's enough to get you through too. There's a story you tell yourself about progress. It goes something like this. People used to live in darkness, bound by superstition and ignorance, and the tyranny of tradition. They believed things that weren't true. They did things that didn't make sense. They suffered under systems that crushed individual freedom and creativity. But then came the Enlightenment, science, modernity, liberation. People learned to think for themselves, to question authority, to build lives based on reason and evidence and choice. And that's good. That's unambiguously good. We've escaped the darkness and stepped into the light. And that story is true. Parts of it anyway. You really have escaped things that needed escaping. You really do have freedoms that your ancestors couldn't imagine. You really can build a life based on your own values, your own choices, your own understanding of what matters. But the story's incomplete, because what you gained in freedom, you lost in coherence. What you gained in autonomy, you lost in belonging. What you gained in rationality, you lost in rhythm. And you feel the loss. Yet you feel it in the weird emptiness that follows achievement. You feel it in the loneliness of crowded rooms. You feel it in the way you can't stop scrolling, can't stop consuming, can't stop searching for something that will finally make you feel full. You feel it when you light a candle for no reason, and wish, for just a moment, that you lived in a world where lighting candles still meant something everyone understood. The progress story tells you that if you feel this way, you're being nostalgic. You're romanticizing a past that was actually terrible. You're forgetting the grinding poverty, the early death, the lack of options, the cruelty of enforced conformity. And you need to remember those things. You need to hold them in tension with the ache you feel. Because the ache is real, but it's not calling you backward. It's calling you to notice what you've lost in moving forward. To grieve it, to honor it, to understand it. Not so you can return to it, but so you can figure out what parts of it you need to carry into the future. You can't go back to a world where everyone does the same rituals at the same time for the same reasons. That world is gone. The conditions that sustained it have dissolved. The beliefs that animated it have faded. The communities that enforced it have fragmented. And you wouldn't want to go back, even if you could, because that world would require you to give up freedoms you treasure. It would demand conformity you'd resist. It would punish deviation in ways you'd find intolerable. But you can learn from it. You can notice what it provided that you're missing. And you can ask yourself, what would it look like to create new forms of that? Not to resurrect the old rituals, but to build new ones. Not to return to the past, but to retrieve what was valuable in it and adapt it for the present. What would it look like to have rhythms that structured your time without controlling your life? To have gestures that connected you to others without demanding uniformity? To have moments when you could rest in collective practice without surrendering your autonomy? Some people are trying to figure this out. They're creating secular rituals, building intentional communities, designing practices that offer structure without dogma. They're lighting candles on the new moon, hosting regular dinners with friends, marking the solstice, creating anniversary traditions, building tiny ceremonies around transitions that used to be unremarked. These efforts are imperfect. They lack the weight of centuries. They feel self-conscious, constructed, a little bit like playing pretend, because they are constructed. You're making them up as you go, trying to create meaning in a world that doesn't hand you the script. But they're also genuine attempts to address a real need. The need for pattern, for rhythm, for shared gestures that create connection. The need to do things that don't have to be justified, that don't have to be optimized, that don't have to produce anything except the experience of doing them together. You're not going to recreate what your ancestors had. You can't. The world's too different. You're too different. The whole context has shifted. But you can create something new that serves some of the same functions. You can build containers for your grief, your joy, your confusion. You can mark time in ways that make it feel less like a blur. You can gather people and do small symbolic things together, and let those things matter even when they don't make rational sense. You can light candles together for reasons you don't have to explain. And maybe, over time, those small gestures will accumulate. They'll start to create their own meaning, their own weight. They'll become reference points you return to. They'll start to feel less like something you're doing and more like something you're part of. That's how ritual works, after all. It's not meaningful because it's old. It's meaningful because it's repeated. Because you do it again and again until it wears a groove in your life, until it shapes how you move through time, until it becomes part of the structure that holds you. Your ancestors didn't invent their rituals either. They inherited them, yes, but at some point, someone had to start doing the thing. Someone had to light the first candle, speak the first prayer, mark the first threshold. And it probably felt awkward and self-conscious and made up. But they kept doing it. And their children did it. And their children's children. And over time, the repetition created meaning, the way water creates canyons. Slowly, through persistent return to the same path. You can do that too. You can start things. You can repeat things. You can invite others to join you in the repetition. And you can trust that meaning will emerge from the practice, even if you can't see it yet. This is harder than it sounds, because you're swimming against the current of a culture that values novelty, efficiency, constant optimization. A culture that asks, "What's the point?" and expects a clear answer. A culture that's suspicious of anything that can't be measured or monetized or explained in terms of personal growth. But the point of ritual is that it doesn't have a point beyond itself. You do it because you do it. Because doing it connects you to something. Because the gesture itself is the meaning. And you're allowed to do things that have no point. You're allowed to gather friends for dinner every full moon, even though there's no logical reason to tie dinner to the lunar cycle. You're allowed to light candles on the anniversary of a loss, even though the candles don't bring anyone back. You're allowed to sing songs at the solstice, even though singing doesn't affect the sun's return. You're allowed to do things for symbolic reasons, for poetic reasons, for reasons that don't make sense to anyone, but feel true to you. That's not regression. That's not irrational. That's you trying to meet a human need that rationality alone can't satisfy. Because you're not just a mind, you're a body that needs rhythm. You're a social creature that needs connection. You're a meaning-making being that needs to feel embedded in something larger than yourself. And you can meet those needs without abandoning your commitment to reason, to freedom, to individual choice. You can have both. You can think critically and also participate in gestures that precede thought. You can value autonomy and also crave structure. You can be modern and also honor what was valuable in the past. The candle holds all of this. It's a technology from the ancient world that still works in the modern one. It's a gesture that means nothing and everything. It's a way of saying, I'm here, I care. I don't know what else to do, but I'm doing this. And when you light it, you're joining everyone else who ever felt that way. Everyone who ever stood in the dark and made a small light and hoped it mattered. You're part of that line now. Part of that long, unbroken chain of people trying to make meaning in a world that doesn't hand it to them. Your ancestors did it with the resources they had. You're doing it with the resources you have. The resources are different, but the need is the same. You need to feel like your life connects to something. Like your actions ripple beyond yourself. Like you're part of a pattern that's bigger and older and more enduring than your individual existence. You need to belong. Not to be controlled, not to be subsumed, but to be held. To know your place. To participate in something that was here before you and will continue after you're gone. The candle offers that, in miniature. For just a moment, you're not alone. For just a moment, you're doing what people have always done. And that moment matters. Not because it changes anything material, but because it reminds you that you're part of something. Even when you can't see it. Even when you can't name it. Even when the reasons have faded and all that's left is the gesture. The gesture is enough. It's always been enough. Let's talk about something you don't usually think about. The weight of being conscious. The burden of knowing that you know. Of having to make sense of your own existence in every moment. Animals don't have this problem. They live, they die, they don't wonder why. The bird doesn't question whether singing at dawn is meaningful. The tree doesn't doubt the purpose of growing toward light. They just do what they do, following patterns encoded in their being, and the doing is its own justification. But you're aware. You're aware that you're aware. You can step outside your own experience and observe it, judge it, question it. And that capacity, that distinctly human capacity for self-reflection, is both your greatest gift and your heaviest burden. Because once you can question things, you have to question things. Or once you can ask, why am I doing this? You can't not ask. Every action becomes potentially suspect. Every belief becomes potentially unfounded. Every tradition becomes potentially arbitrary. And that's useful in many ways. It lets you escape bad patterns. It lets you challenge injustice. It lets you build new and better ways of being. But it also makes it very, very hard to just do things. To just participate. To just be. Your ancestors had less of this burden. Not because they were less intelligent, they weren't. But because their cultures hadn't yet developed the tools and technologies that make constant self-reflection possible. They lived more in their bodies, more in the moment, more embedded in the flow of life. They did things because that's what you did. They followed the patterns because the patterns were there, weren't as natural as the seasons, as given as the landscape. They didn't spend a lot of time wondering if the patterns were meaningful or if they were doing them for the right reasons. They just did them. And there was a kind of grace in that, a kind of ease, an ability to be unreflective that gave them access to experiences you struggle to reach. When they lit candles in ritual, they weren't thinking about whether they meant it. They weren't performing authenticity for an invisible audience. They weren't worried about being sincere or being seen as sincere. They just lit the candles, and the lighting was real, and that was enough. You can't do that anymore. You can't not be self-conscious. Even when you try to be present, part of you is watching yourself try to be present, evaluating how well you're doing, wondering if you're doing it right. This is the cost of consciousness. This is the price of living in a world that values self-awareness, intentionality, authentic self-expression. You gain the ability to examine your life, but you lose the ability to simply live it without examination. And the loss is real. You feel it in your inability to lose yourself in experience. You feel it in the way even joyful moments have a film of observation over them, a part of you that's not quite participating because it's too busy watching yourself participate. You feel it in the exhaustion of constant self-monitoring, the endless internal dialogue about whether you're being true to yourself, whether you're making the right choices, whether your life means what you want it to mean. The rituals offered a respite from this. They were moments when you could stop watching yourself and just be part of something. When the script was so clear, so given, that you didn't have to think. You just followed along, and the following was its own form of freedom. You surrendered your individuality for the duration of the ritual, but you gained something in return. The relief of not having to be yourself for a while. The relief of being held by something larger. The relief of doing what everyone else was doing and not having to wonder if it was right or meaningful or authentic. You just did it. And in the doing, you accessed a state of self-conscious participation that's almost impossible to reach in modern life. This is part of what you miss when you light the candle. You're missing the possibility of being unreflective, of doing something without having to analyze why you're doing it, or what it means, or whether you really mean it. But here's the thing, you can't get that back through nostalgia. You can't think your way into unself-consciousness. The harder you try to be present, the more present you become to your own trying. This is the trap. This is why all the mindfulness apps and meditation practices and attempts to live in the moment often just make things worse, because they turn unself-consciousness into a goal, a thing to achieve, a metric to measure yourself against. And the measuring destroys the thing you're trying to measure. So what do? You do the thing anyway. You light the candle even though you're aware you're lighting the candle, even though you're watching yourself light the candle, or even though you can't fully lose yourself in the gesture the way your ancestors might have. You do it anyway, and you accept that your participation is imperfect, that you're stuck in your head, that you can't achieve the unself-conscious grace you imagined they had. And here's the secret. They probably couldn't either. At least not always. At least not perfectly. You've romanticized their experience. You've imagined they lived in some state of pure, unreflective being, perfectly embedded in the rhythms of life, never doubting, never questioning, never feeling the gap between the gesture and its meaning. But they were human too. They doubted. They questioned. They went through the motions sometimes, feeling nothing, wondering what the point was. They had their own forms of alienation, their own struggles with meaning, their own versions of the existential weight you carry. The difference is they had less choice about it. They had to participate in the rituals whether they felt like it or not. And sometimes that forcing function was oppressive. But sometimes it was a gift, because it meant they participated even when they didn't feel it, even when they doubted it, even when they were just going through the motions. And you know what? Going through the motions still does something. The body has its own wisdom. The gesture still works even when the mind is skeptical. You light the candle, and you're thinking about whether it means anything, and you're aware of your own performance of meaning, and you're tangled up in self-consciousness. But your hands still move. The match still strikes. The flame still catches. The light still flickers in the dark. And something in you responds to that light beneath the layer of self-consciousness. Something older, something that doesn't need to understand, something that just recognizes This is what humans do. This is how we mark the dark. This is how we make meaning. Your body knows things your mind doesn't. Your hands know the weight of the match, the heat of the flame. Your eyes know how to track the flicker. Your breath knows how to synchronize with the burning. And if you can just do the thing, just let your body do it without requiring it to mean anything specific, without needing it to feel a certain way. If you can just light the candle and let the lighting be what it is, then sometimes, for just a moment, the self-consciousness falls away. Not because you've achieved some special state, but because the gesture itself, the simple physical reality of it, pulls you out of your head and into your body. This is the paradox. You can't try to be unreflective, but you can do simple things with your hands, and in the doing, find yourself momentarily free from the burden of watching yourself do them. The candle is good for this. It's simple. It requires attention, but not analysis. You have to be present to light it safely, but you don't have to think profound thoughts. You just strike, watch, breathe. And in that simplicity sometimes, you find a crack in the wall of self-consciousness. A moment when you're just there, just present, just doing the thing. It doesn't last. The self-consciousness always comes back. But you've had the moment. You've tasted what your ancestors might have had more access to. And that taste is valuable, even if you can't sustain it. And this is what ritual can still give you, even in its diminished modern form. Not transcendence, not transformation, not even meaning necessarily. Just moments of simple presence. Moments when the doing is enough. Moments when you're part of the pattern without having to understand it. You don't need to believe anything for this to work. You don't need to adopt anyone's religion or join anyone's community or convince yourself that the old ways were better. You just need to be willing to do simple things sometimes. To light candles without asking why. To say words that don't belong to you. To make gestures that predate your existence. And to trust that the doing itself is enough, even when it doesn't feel like enough. Even when you're watching yourself do it. Even when you can't escape the weight of being conscious. Because you are conscious, that's not going to change. You can't go back to some imagined state of unreflective grace. But you can do the things anyway. You can participate even from inside your self-consciousness. You can let your body know things your mind doesn't. And sometimes, in the gap between lighting the match and watching the flame catch, you'll find something like peace. Not because you've solved anything, but because for just a second, you stopped trying to solve anything. You just lit the candle, and the candle just burned. And that was enough. There's a question that sits underneath all of this, unspoken, but always present. What are you supposed to do with your life? Not in the career sense, though that's part of it. Not in the relationship sense, though that's part of it too. But in the larger sense, so in the existential sense. What are you supposed to be doing with the brief, confusing, often painful experience of being alive? Your ancestors had an answer to this question. Not a good answer, necessarily. Not an answer you'd accept. But an answer nonetheless. You were supposed to fulfill your role. To do what your station required. To participate in the order you were born into. To marry, have children, work the land, honor the dead, worship the gods, and pass the pattern on to the next generation. Individual happiness was not the point. Personal fulfillment was not the point. Finding yourself, expressing yourself, becoming your authentic self. These concepts didn't even exist in the way you understand them. The point was continuity. The point was keeping the pattern going. You were a link in a chain, and your job was to not break the chain. That was it. That was the meaning of your life. And it sounds oppressive when you say it like that. It sounds like a crushing weight, a denial of individual worth, a system that grinds people down into cogs in a machine. And it was that, for many people, for people who didn't fit the roles assigned to them, for people who wanted something different, something more, something else, for people who chafed under the weight of expectation, who were crushed by the narrow confines of the roles available to them. But it was also something else. It was a relief from the question, from the endless, exhausting question of what you're supposed to do with your life. Because the answer was given, you didn't have to figure it out. You didn't have to choose your own adventure. Or you didn't have to construct a meaningful life from scratch. You just had to do what people like you did. And in doing it, you were part of something. You mattered, not because you were special, but because you were necessary. The pattern needed you. The chain needed your link. You've rejected that answer. And you should, because it comes at too high a cost. It sacrifices too much individual freedom, too much human potential, too much of what makes life worth living. But in rejecting it, you've taken on a different burden. The burden of choice. The burden of self-creation. The burden of figuring out what your life is supposed to mean when no one's telling you anymore. And that burden is crushing you. You feel it in the anxiety that wakes you up at 3 a.m., in the scrolling that never satisfies, in the achievements that ring hollow, is in the relationships that feel performative. You feel it in the constant sense that you should be doing something else, being someone else, living some other life that would finally make sense. You're free to choose, but you don't know what to choose. You're free to create meaning, but you don't know how. You're free to be yourself, but you're not sure who that is. And so you light candles sometimes, reaching for something you can't name, reaching for a sense of place, of purpose, of belonging to something that doesn't require you to invent it. This is the central tension of modern life. You have freedoms your ancestors would have killed for, but you also have responsibilities they never had to face. You get to choose your life, but you also have to choose it every single day, with no guarantee that your choices will add up to anything meaningful. The rituals helped with this, not by giving you better choices, but by relieving you of the burden of choosing, at least in some domains. You didn't choose when to celebrate, what to celebrate, how to mourn, how to mark transitions. Those things were given. The pattern was there, and you stepped into it. And stepping into it felt like coming home. Not because home was perfect, not because the pattern was good, but because it was there, and it held you, and you didn't have to hold yourself. You can't have that anymore, at least not in the way they had it. The patterns have dissolved. The roles have opened up. The scripts have been questioned, and many have been discarded. But you can build new patterns. Smaller ones, more flexible ones. See, patterns that serve you instead of trapping you. You can decide to light a candle every Sunday evening as the week ends. You can decide to gather friends for dinner on the full moon. You can decide to mark the solstice, or your birthday, or the anniversary of a loss with some small ritual that matters to you. These aren't ancient traditions. They don't have the weight of centuries. They're things you're making up as you go along. But if you do them consistently, if you repeat them, if you invite others to join you, they start to create their own gravity. They start to become reference points. They start to feel like something you belong to rather than something you're doing. And over time, they can provide some of what the old rituals provided: rhythm, structure, a sense of participating in something larger than your individual whim. They won't solve the question of what you're supposed to do with your life. Nothing will solve that question. It's not solvable. It's the question you have to live inside, now that you're free. But they can make the question more bearable. They can give you moments when you're not trying to answer it, when you're just doing something simple and repetitive and shared, when you're just lighting the candle because that's what you do on Sunday evening. And those moments matter. They create islands of certainty in an ocean of choice. They let you rest, briefly, from the exhausting work of self-creation. This is not regression. This is not giving up your freedom. This is using your freedom to create structures that support you, that help you be the person you want to be, not through constant willpower, but through embedded practice. And your ancestors didn't have to use willpower to participate in ritual. The ritual was just there, part of the landscape of life. You have to be more intentional about it. You have to create it deliberately. But once you create it, once you commit to it Once you repeat it enough times, it starts to work the same way. It becomes something you do, rather than something you think about doing. And in becoming something you do, it frees up space in your mind for other things. You're not constantly deciding whether to light the candle. You just light it. It's Sunday evening. That's what you do. This is the gift you can give yourself. Patterns that hold you so you don't have to hold yourself. Rhythms that carry you so you don't have to push yourself. Gestures that connect you so you don't have to perform connection. Small things, simple things. Things that don't require belief or justification or explanation. Things you just do because you do them, and in the doing, find a kind of peace. The candle is a start. It's a small pattern, a simple gesture, a way of marking time that doesn't demand anything of you except a match and a moment. But it's enough. It's a thread you can hold. And if you hold it long enough, it starts to weave into something. Not a whole fabric, not a complete pattern, but something. A small structure in the formlessness, a tiny rhythm in the chaos. And maybe that's all you need right now. Not answers, not certainty, not a complete system for living. Just a small gesture that reminds you that you can create structure, that you can participate in patterns, that you can build tiny rituals that hold meaning, even in a world that's forgotten how to hold you. Light the candle, watch it burn, let it go out, do it again next week, and in the repetition, find something like home. The night is getting deeper now. You can feel it, can't you? That sense of time slowing, thoughts softening, the edges of the day finally starting to blur. You've been carrying so much. All day, every day, you carry the weight of being someone who has to figure everything out. Someone who has to make choices, construct meaning, justify existence. Someone who has to be present and intentional and authentic and growing. It's exhausting. You're exhausted. And maybe that's why the candle calls to you. Not because it solves anything, but because it asks nothing of you except a simple gesture. It doesn't care if you understand it. It doesn't need you to mean anything by it. It just burns. You can be like that sometimes too. You can just be. Without having to mean anything specific. Without having to add up to anything. Without having to justify your presence in the world. You exist. That's enough. It's always been enough. Your ancestors knew this, in their bones, if not in their minds. They knew that life didn't have to mean something grand to be worth living. They knew that most days were just days, hard, repetitive, full of small tasks that didn't add up to anything except survival. And they did those tasks anyway. They lived anyway. They found moments of beauty anyway, moments of connection, moments when the light hit the water in a certain way, and they stopped and looked and felt something they couldn't name. They lit their candles in the dark, and the candles didn't transform anything, didn't solve anything. I didn't mean anything the way you think meaning should work, but the candles mattered anyway. They mattered because light matters when you're surrounded by dark. They mattered because small gestures matter when everything feels overwhelming. They mattered because doing something, anything, together is better than facing the void alone. You're facing the same void they faced, the same existential darkness, the same uncertainty about whether any of this means anything, the same fear that you're just going through motions in a universe that doesn't care. But you're not alone in facing it. You never have been. Everyone who came before you faced it too. And they developed these small technologies for managing it. These rituals, these gestures, these ways of making light in the dark. Not to defeat the darkness. You can't defeat the darkness. And it's always there, always waiting, patient and eternal. But you can refuse to let it have the final word. You can strike a match. You can make a small light. You can gather with others and multiply that light briefly before it goes out. And in that brief burning, you can remember, you're part of something. You're part of the long line of humans who refused to accept that darkness was all there was, who insisted, stubbornly, irrationally against all evidence that light mattered, that small gestures mattered, that showing up and doing the thing, even when the thing was pointless, mattered. You're part of that line now. When you light your candle, you join them. All the people who ever stood where you're standing, feeling what you're feeling, doing what you're doing. They're gone now. Their lights went out. But they were here. They burned. And their burning mattered, even though it didn't last. Yours matters too. Not because it'll last, not because it'll change anything, but because you're here, now, making light. Participating in the ancient gesture, refusing to let the darkness be all there is. That's enough. That's always been enough. You can rest in that. You can let the weight fall away. Just for a moment. You can stop trying to figure out what your life means and just be alive. Just breathe. Just watch the candle burn. You don't have to hold yourself right now. The gesture holds you. The pattern holds you. The long line of everyone who came before holds you. You can rest. You can let go. You can trust that you don't have to understand everything, that you don't have to justify everything, that you don't have to be anything except here, now. Breathing in the dark, the candle burns. You breathe. The moment holds you. And that's all there is. That's all there's ever been. Just this. Just now. Just the small light in the darkness, burning for no reason except that you lit it. And somehow, inexplicably, that's enough. It's always been enough. Your breathing is slower now. Your thoughts are starting to drift, to soften around the edges. The questions that felt so urgent a few hours ago are fading into something quieter, something you don't have to answer right now. You can feel the candle in your mind's eye. It's light, soft and warm. It's flame, steady and small. Just burning, just being. Not trying to illuminate the whole world, just making its small circle of light in the darkness. You can be like that too. You don't have to illuminate everything. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to fix everything. You can just be your small light, burning in your small corner of the darkness, doing what you can, being what you are, present, here, now, for as long as the flame lasts. And when your flame goes out, as all flames do, others will light theirs. The pattern continues. The gesture repeats. The light keeps being made again and again by people who don't fully understand why they're doing it, but do it anyway. Because humans make light in the darkness. That's what we do. That's what we've always done. We light candles. We gather together. We say words that have been said before. We make small gestures that connect us to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. We participate in the pattern, even when we don't understand it. As especially when we don't understand it. Because the pattern is older than understanding. The pattern is older than reasons. The pattern is just what we do, what we've always done, what we'll keep doing as long as there are humans to do it. And you're part of that. You're part of the pattern. You belong to it even when you feel disconnected, even when you feel lost, even when you feel like you don't know why you're doing anything. You belong. You've always belonged. The light you make matters. The gestures you perform matter. The simple act of being here, being present, being alive, it matters. Not because it adds up to something grand, not because it changes the world, but because it's your light, your gesture, your moment of participating in the ancient pattern of humans making meaning in a meaningless void. And that participation, that small act of lighting the candle, is enough. It's always been enough. So let yourself rest now. Let the candle burn in your mind. Let its light be gentle and warm and undemanding. You don't have to do anything right now except breathe. You don't have to be anything except here. You don't have to understand anything except that you're held, gently, by the pattern that's held everyone. The candle burns. You breathe. The darkness is patient and endless, but so is the gesture of making light. Again and again, forever and ever. Small lights in the dark. Your light, their light, our light. All of us, together, refusing to let the darkness have the final word. Making meaning through the simple act of presence, through the simple gesture of light, through the simple truth that we're here, we're together, and we carry the fire forward. One candle at a time, one breath at a time, one moment at a time, until the pattern folds us back into itself, and we become part of the darkness we spent our lives pushing back against. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, the candle burns. Tonight, you breathe. Tonight, you're held by something larger than yourself, something older than reasons, something as simple and profound as light in darkness. Rest in that. Rest in the gesture. Rest in the pattern. You don't have to understand it. You just have to let it hold you. And it does. It always has. The light burns low now, the flame smaller, the wax nearly gone, but it's still burning, still making light, still insisting that darkness isn't all there is, and you're still here, still breathing, still part of the pattern, still held by the ancient gesture of making light, of showing up, of being present in a world that doesn't require your presence, but is somehow made more bearable by it. The candle flickers, your breath slows, the thoughts dissolve into something softer than thought. And in that softness, you find what you've been looking for all along. Not answers, not certainty, not a complete system for living. Just this. The simple knowledge that you're part of something, that you've always been part of something, that the gestures you make, however small, connect you to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after. That you're not alone in the darkness, that you've never been alone, that the light you make, however brief, matters. The candle burns lower, the flame trembles, the darkness gathers close, but there's no fear in it, just peace, just the natural rhythm of light and dark, burning and fading, so presence and absence, just the pattern holding you gently as the day releases you into rest. The candle burns. You breathe. The darkness waits. And in that waiting, in that breathing, in that tiny flame still burning against the night, there's everything you need. There's home. The light grows smaller now, dimmer. The last of the wax pooling, the wick drowning in its own melting. Soon it will go out. Soon the darkness will return. But that's okay. That's always been okay. Because tomorrow you can light another candle. Tomorrow you can make light again. Tomorrow you can participate in the gesture again. And so can everyone else. All of us, together, making our small lights, repeating the pattern, refusing to accept that darkness is all there is. One candle at a time, one breath at a time, one small gesture at a time, forever and ever. And for as long as there are humans to make light, the pattern holds us, the gesture carries us, the candle burns and burns and burns until it doesn't. And then we light another one, and we rest in knowing that someone, somewhere, always will. The flame flickers one last time and goes out, and the darkness is gentle and soft and full of dreams. Rest now. The candle has done its work. The pattern continues. You are held. You have always been held. Sleep